Hi, and welcome to the show. Rate and review at kevinmd.com/rate. Subscribe at kevinmd.com/podcast. Today, we welcome back on the show Craig Bowron. He is an internal medicine physician, and he's the author of the book, Man Overboard, A Medical Lifeline for the Aging Male. There's an excerpt from that book on Kevin MD. Craig, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks for being here.
So we'll talk about your book and excerpt in a little bit, but first off, just briefly share your story and journey to where you are today.
Yeah, I grew up in farm country in northern Illinois. We weren't from a literary background or even from a college background, so I was kind of the first kid to go off to school. Got interested in biology in undergrad, was a pre-med and English major, kind of a odd combination. I was able to kind of sandwich the two in. I don't know if I did either one of them particularly well. But I got into med school at Southern Illinois University, graduated from there, I felt like at that point, I'd gone straight from undergrad to medical school. At that point, I felt like I needed some time just to clear. I had thought too much for too long and just needed so I moved up to Minneapolis with a friend and just did odd temp jobs and read books and, kind of reconnected with the world. And then I ended up starting an internal medicine residency program at Abbott Northwestern, which is kind of in downtown Minneapolis. And did that for a while, was a chief resident. And then it was just like 96. And one of my fellow residents who graduated the year before me said like, hey, you want to just stick around and join my group? I said, well, what are you doing? He said, well, we're going to take like unassigned patients from the emergency room. And then there's a couple clinics in the West Metro and we'll do all their admitting. I'm like, right, yeah, I'll stick around to do that. Well, here we are, 27 years later. It turns out we were hospitalists. The term wasn't even around, I don't think, or we certainly didn't apply to ourselves or know that it was. I never, ever thought, I planned on being a small town doctor. I never thought I'd end up doing this, but I joke amongst my group, that I call myself a silverback hospitalist. I'm the old guy with the old day stories of when we were just starting as a hospitalist group, And of course they roll their eyes. And we didn't even have an EMR. We had to write stuff down on paper. So I kill them with those kind of stories.
So over your decades-long career in internal medicine, what's the biggest evolution in internal medicine that you've observed?
Well, so we like to complain, right? But yeah. I mean, come on, the electronic medical record is such a game changer, because one thing I can tell my younger partners is like someone who had been here a month, they come back and they left a week ago. They come in the emergency room and you say like, well, they got a big sternotomy wound and not much else. And they go, well, I was just here. So, well, where's the chart? Well, it's coming up from records. Is it here yet? No, it's not here yet. So then we call records. They say, well, we sent it up, well, it's supposed to be there, or, and without that, you knew nothing, virtually only hearsay from what the patient said. And now you can just walk in and you can read up. I know you were here 3 weeks ago. I know did this and this. I know this person did your surgery. I know you saw the surgeon to follow up 5 days ago. I know you saw your primary. I know so that is just, yeah, we all have our complaints. It's not a perfect system. It's a billing system, maybe more than a charting system. I get that. So I'd say that. And then, the future is kind of hospital medicine is exactly what they predicted. People who are more complicated, staying for shorter amounts of time. That is just, it is happening. And it just continues to happen. It's not even like a straight curve. It just seems to go up and up. So sometimes I'm just like, I leave the patient's chart, walk away from the room, and I just kind of, my head spins and I think like, I cannot believe we are balancing, they're on some target, they're on immunotherapy, and they're on oral anticoagulants and an antiplatelet because they've got stents and they've got barely functioning, barely stable kidney function. And it's like that. And to think that it's only going to get more so. I'm sure we'll find a way. So I'd say maybe the EMR and then just the rising complexity. The good news is we're keeping people alive who didn't. We see that with the novel therapies, in particular, advanced cardiovascular stuff. But how to do that? Woo!
So as part of your story, you mentioned that you were an English major and you decided to use that in your writing your book, Man Overboard, A Medical Lifeline for the Aging Male. So how did this book come about? Why is there a need to write a book about the aging male?
I'll start with an SNL story. I saw Jason Sudeikis was on SNL sometime last year, and he was talking about the surprising success of Ted Lasso. And he said, I really didn't expect that because it's about two things that Americans hate: soccer and optimism. And I was listening to that. I was laughing, kind of like, okay, I've written a book for a group of people who don't read that much, or not near as much as women, men, about a subject that they like to avoid, that is health. So how is that for a marketing plan? So it's not. So it is in some sense, I'm kind of half joking, but it is kind of a niche market. If you're a person who's ever tried to pitch a men's health book, the feedback you get from literary agents and from publishers is just like, love the idea, it'll never sell. And I think that's, some of it is, yeah, men just don't read as much as women if you look at who buys books. But some of it is really just, there's something uniquely male about getting old. Now, women are under the pressure that women live with is to remain beautiful, is to maintain their beauty. And men's value is a lot about physicality, and both of those things, there's a bit of a battle. But as we get older, we take it hard. And one of the things I think when I do read stuff that's written to men, it's either like ridiculously simple, it's all about erectile dysfunction and muscle building, like two extremes that most men are like, yeah, those are maybe of concern to them, but not in the degree that, I don't need to be muscle bound. I'm not looking to reincarnate Schwarzenegger. So that there was like no middle ground. Everything seems to be kind of extreme. So I don't think men are stupid. We're not stupid. I just think when it comes to healthcare, we're a little disinterested and maybe even a little scared.
How did you write your book to reach out to this demographic? How did you make men more interested in their health? So what approach did you take?
Well, so the writing, my writing started with a column in a magazine called Minnesota Monthly, which is associated with Minnesota Public Radio. And the editor at the time was a graduate from the Iowa Writers Workshop, a very creative guy. And I grew up reading. I didn't read a lot. There wasn't a lot of literature in our house. And I read a lot of Dave Barry, the humorist. Honestly, I read that in Reader's Digest. That was mostly what was around the newspaper. And so early on, when I started done with residency and started reading stuff that was written to the public, like, why does it have to be so overly serious, so threatening? Why can't you learn about otitis media and have fun with it? I mean, getting ill is not fun. So from the very beginning, for me, it was just like, I remember somebody wrote in and said, like, I'm not even interested in hemorrhoids, but I read your whole article, because it just sucked me in. The New Yorker does that. You're at the end of some New Yorker article and it's like, whatever, 1,500 words on the industrial uses of starch. And you think, why would I read that? What I hope I've done is, in some ways, written a fun but factual book. It's lighthearted. It's a bit of a lament, for aging males. I mean, it's a personal book. I consider myself a pre-geezer, which I put as, you can contest this, I made it up myself, but 55 to 70 is what I call pre-geezers, and 70 beyond is geezerhood, so I consider myself a pre-geezer. So some of it was just grappling with my own sort of thing. So it's very personal, but it's, for most of all my writing, I've never tried to take myself too seriously. Sure. I take the information very seriously. I think most of the public's kind of done with the, sit down and shut up, I'm your doctor. I think they're just done with that. So in some ways it wasn't too hard for me because that's kind of been my tone. The book starts out with a poem, not much of a poet, but it starts with this poem called Song for the Aging Male. And it goes, throwing off the shackles of youth, I reached for the stars and pulled a hip flexor. Damn it. And I think, that's the lament part. Hopefully readers can say like, I recognize that. I had a friend who was pulling into a parking garage and he pulled past the card sensor a little bit, so he had to hyperextend to swipe his parking card. 3 weeks.
Wow.
I think as you get older, you can either cry or laugh. And I think sometimes, laughing's a better option.
So for the aging male, in your view, what are some of the major health issues that they should be on the lookout for?
Well, I start by saying like, hey, let's do this. Let's be fear focused. Fear focused can be good. So, from early on, from our teens on to our mid 40s, most of, if you're going to die, it's from what they call accidental deaths. So most of that's a good chunk of that is motor vehicle accidents, what they call poisonings, which would be basically alcohol or drug overdoses, gunshot wounds, some other things. But by the time you move into your mid 40s, and truly become aging, it's cancer and heart disease, all the basically neck and neck, back and forth, all the way to the end. I talk about nutrition, activity, exercise, balding. There's a lot of those topics, but particularly the back half is really like, okay, these are the things that they're going to shorten your life. Let's get serious about those. So there's a heavy focus on cardiovascular disease. What are the risk factors? What can you do about them? And then basically I take a chapter piece for the common male cancers, so prostate, colon, and lung, and talk about the ins and outs of those. There is a chapter on mental health, which I think is finally getting its due. People are talking about it. So there's a chapter on that. So there's a big focus on that.
So as it relates to men, what are some of the mental health issues that they have to be on the lookout for?
So I start out, actually, in some ways, the beginning of that chapter is the most personal, because I kind of talk about, here's where I grew up. I grew up in a very good family, but people didn't talk about, their emotions. Just like, tough, suck it up, particularly to the boys, hey, suck it up. Nobody's happy. It was they were not spoken about. And as it happened is I grew up in a river town that was like three towns down from a mental health, I think it was probably a TB sanitarium, but then it's been converted to a mental health facility at the state of Illinois, and occasionally we drive by there and like, so those are the people those are the mentally ill over there. They live in those brick buildings and don't come outside. And that's the mentally ill. Everyone else is normal. What you find out particularly as a physician, because you're privy to the minds and the moods of so many people, you figure out that we're all our own brand of crazy, and so there are certain criteria you need to have officially have an anxiety disorder, but we all deal with symptoms of anxiety. You don't have to have an official diagnosis of depression to have a diagnosis to deal with depressive thoughts. And I think, to me, that's the big thing. It's not them and us. We are all every day dealing with our moods and our anxieties, and COVID has helped that a little bit. I think kind of brought it, like, what you're feeling is what a lot of people feel all the time. So it's all these chapters. It's a big book. It has a lot of different chapters in it, and I intentionally, you can write a whole book about colon cancer, and it's been done. That was not my goal. My goal was like, can I give people like the nuts and bolts of it, a concept, like, okay, I get it. I know where it starts. I know where it goes. I know how they look for it. I know what the basic treatments are. I know that it's a better diagnosis than lung cancer. So that was a lot of ways the challenge of the book is to make it smart but readable, and not too long.
We're talking to Craig Bowron. He is an internal medicine physician. He's the author of the book Man Overboard, a medical lifeline for the aging male. So Craig, I think the scenario that you talked about earlier about how men often want to avoid their health, that plays out in the exam room, because a lot of times when I do physicals for older males, they don't necessarily want to be there. Sometimes they're dragged in by their wives, and a lot of times they don't want to open up about their health. So do you have any tips in the exam room, kind of questions that we could ask older males on how they could be more cognizant and open up about their health?
That's a tough question. As a hospitalist, I don't do the work you do. I think as a hospitalist, what I'm fortunate to have is like, it's checkmate. It's time to talk. You're in the hospital, buddy. Things are whatever you told Kevin, it ain't holding up here, because so I get the advantage of, like, they want to talk and they're ready to admit to it. And so I don't have to have the conversation that you do. It does remind me, I was talking to a gastroenterologist about my book, and he laughed and he goes like, women are the best patients. They come in and they got their list of their 7 medications. And then they have 3 questions that they want you to answer, and then my male patients come in and they got 1 symptom that they want you to figure out. And when you say, well, what meds are you on? They'll say like, well, I don't know. My wife takes care of that, So part of the book is to say, like, come on, this John Wayne stuff just doesn't fly. And I would think for you, my guess would be it's your relationship. So as they get to trust you and to recognize you, they may not say it the first time, but if you didn't push them too hard and you were open to what they did say, it's the next time. It's the next time. Like for us in the hospital, sometimes we have hospice conversations, and it's not about the here and now. It's about 3 admissions from now, when they're ready to talk, when they're ready to see what's going on. I wish I had 3 good tips. My guess is that you and your relationship is the only thing that'll get them to open up, that there's no kind of magic key to, and that for, you know, how we men are, sometimes the harder you push, the more like tight-lipped they get.
Any take-home messages that you want to leave with the Kevin MD audience?
I'd love to do a column sometime to kind of, with you, to see what it is. Part of growing older as an aging male is like, is this the new normal? Is this the new normal? You know, I'm feeling this, but there's no book on what is normal. What's normal for a 58-year-old? Should a 73-year-old be feeling this? Should a 68-year-old be feeling this? I'd love to, and because I don't do clinic work, I think that's even harder for me to sort of like, what is the normal? Like, I'd be interested in you, like when someone says, come to you, you know, I had this, and you'd say like, I think that's normal for a lot of men your age. It'd be fun to create some kind of thing, you will, so we can all sort of say like, you know, that's normal. I see that in a lot of men. I bet you probably had it in your head because of your clinic work. I don't so much. Yeah, so that's my message.
All right, Craig. Thank you again for coming back on the show and talk about your book, and always welcome to contribute another piece.
Well, thanks. Appreciate it.